The Blob 2 was originally released back in 2011 and was a sequel to 2008's The Blob. Both games were generally well received back in the day and have recently both received remastered releases on current gen consoles, including, of course, the Nintendo Switch. Does this game hold up to this day? I'm Glenn, this is Switchup. Thank you to the developers for the review copy. Now, let's find out. The story of The Blob 2 sees you once again trying to defeat the evil Comrade Black and stop his scheme to rid the world of colour. You move around each level painting city blocks which will in turn free the residents trapped inside. Painting the residents will grant you a time boost as you look for the next block to paint. Some will call for you to paint them certain colours and you will be shown this by the colour that the particular buildings are flashing. When looking for the next area you need to paint, there is no map as such, and instead your character has a radar or a compass above their head, which has symbols of your next objective, or shows the locations of various paint colours. Following this will lead you to where you need to go. Although a map would be easier for you to pinpoint exactly what you were looking for, the compass does work surprisingly well for the most part. Although it's sometimes a little difficult to tell exactly where you need to go when dealing with locations that are of more than one story high. Once you have coloured all of the blocks in one area, the transform engine appears and hitting this will return the area to its original colourful state, and you will be moved on to the next area. Clear all areas in one level to move on to the next. Just before you complete the final step of an area, a selection of mini challenges will open up and you will be given the chance to attempt these before finishing that level. As well as the challenges, you can also earn gold medals called Liberation Awards for colouring all of certain groups of things within a level, such as buildings or trees. It's strange, as it seems for all the world that the gameplay should become repetitive quite quickly, but it's therapeutic in a way, and it almost becomes a compulsion trying to find any parts of the level that you've missed. There is a 2-player co-op mode available as well, which sees you trying to complete certain challenges together once you have unlocked levels by completing them in story mode. As you move through the game, you will be learning dash attacks, running against walls and mixing colours in order to solve various paint related problems. There are also some 2D sections thrown in as well. The biggest issue I had with the gameplay is that the game just refuses to ever let go of your hand. It's almost as if it's terrified of you making a mistake or not knowing what to do, and because of this constantly tells you what you need to do next. Rather than leave it for you to deduce that a red switch probably means that you'd need to change yourself to red in order to press it, the game will just explicitly tell you. Another slight issue I found was that the time between checkpoints was quite inconsistent. Sometimes a checkpoint would come around fairly quickly, whilst other times I needed to play for a bit longer than I actually wanted to in order to save the game. This is a shame, as it's quite a nice game to play in small chunks at the end of the day, for example, and being forced to play that bit longer than you actually want to does tarnish this a little bit. At least with the Nintendo Switch version you can put the console into rest mode, but this is a feature of the console and really should have been something that the remastered version addressed itself. Gameplay receives 15 out of 20. Much like its predecessor, the game world is initially made up of whites and greys until you use the paint pools strewn across the level to add a touch of colour to proceedings. I love how the game shows this transformation, not just in the obvious way of the colour returning, but also by the reanimation of certain objects once colour has been injected into them. Billboards will show a more vibrant picture, cars will drive off once they've been painted, trees and parasols will spring to life, and residents of each area will whoop with joy. The fact that the level quite literally blooms and blossoms in front of your eyes as you add colour really helps to keep you invested in carrying on. Characters will dance in the street and the beat of the music will step up a gear as the world is brought back to life. Mentioning the music, it really is quite lovely and certainly adds character and atmosphere to an already very charming game. The simplicity of the art style mixed with the vibrancy of the colours work very well, and both graphics and sound have held up very well to this day. Graphics receive 18 out of 20, whilst audio also receives 18 out of 20. The biggest issue I had with the first De Blob game, a problem that was not fixed for the recent remaster, was the camera. It was very difficult to manoeuvre and got in the player's way more often than not. Well, the sequel does a very good job of fixing that problem. The camera is much more responsive this time round, making it easier to manoeuvre and therefore allowing the player to see what they are doing. I must admit that the default settings were not to my liking, as both the X and Y axis were inverted and the sensitivity was not quite high enough, but this can be changed in the options menu. You may find the default settings to be just right, but if you don't, just know that the options allow you to customise these to a degree. New techniques are taught to you along the way, as I've already mentioned, and this never feels overwhelming. The game's controls again hold up very well and they receive 16 out of 20. De Blob 2 costs £26.99 or $29.99, which is quite a hefty price for a re-release of an older game. To be fair though, the game does pack a decent amount of content, and as I've said a couple of times now, it does hold up well, both in terms of gameplay and visuals. A familiar theme does seem to be recurring in recent reviews, in that once again, I have already seen this game going for much cheaper in its physical form. So again, this might be the way to go when it comes to this one. Value receives 14 out of 20. To conclude, De Blob 2 is a nice example of an older game that does not look at all out of place on newer consoles. There is nothing about this game that would make you think that this was released in a previous generation, and it makes itself quite at home on the Nintendo Switch. It also does what good sequels should do by taking the interesting premise of the original and refining it, making it a little more structured and focused, as well as fixing other issues such as the camera controls. The game's premise does become a little repetitive over time, and there is definitely inconsistency between the time it takes to reach checkpoints. Plus, it really needs to trust players to figure things out for themselves rather than stop the action so often to give instructions. But having said all that, this is a fun, relaxing game that I found myself unwinding to for a little while each evening, and De Blob 2 receives a Switchup score of 81%. Many thanks as always for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so for all things Switch all the time. If you have subscribed but have not pressed that notifications button, again, please consider doing this to stay up to date with our latest content. And as always, happy gaming.